Hey guys, my name is Neel and welcome to Neel Workshop Zone. So in this JavaScript episode, we will be learning more about keywords and identifiers. So in the previous episodes, we talked about a lot of JavaScript code. So if you haven't checked it out, recommend checking out those episodes. But in this episode, we will be learning about keywords and identifiers and much more things. So without further ado, let's talk about them. So first, let's talk about keywords. So there are a lot of keywords, but there are 9 main keywords and we'll talk about them in this episode. So first let's talk about constant, let and wait. Now all 3 of these are really similar, that is why we're talking about it. So all 3 of these are used to define a variable or a block of variables, and you're wondering that if all 3 of these are used to define a variable, then there has to be some difference between them, and the answer is yes, there is difference between them. We use 3 of these keywords to define a variable in different scenarios. So let us assume you're working on a web page or some code which can be accessible by any web browser, or which can be accessible for old web browsers and old programming operating systems. So in that case you can use variable, so that you can do something like variable x is equal to 2, so that this code can run in older web pages and on old programming and operating systems as well. So that is why we use variables for old operating systems. And now coming to constant and let, both of these are similar, but there is a major difference between them. Imagine writing a code where the variable function or the variable is remaining defined and it's not being changed in the code. In that case you can use constant. As name suggests, constant basically means that it stays in the same way forever. Constant in this JavaScript program, you can use it as a keyword, is used to define a variable that will not be changed in the future, so that the type or value of the variable is not changed. So if I write something like const x is equal to 2, this means that in the future programming code I cannot change the value of x is equal to 2. And let, on the other hand, is the opposite, where if I write something like let x is equal to 2, I can change the value of this keyword of the type of the value of the variable in the future. So that is basically keywords, or these 3 keywords. Now let's talk about other keywords as well. Now let's talk about switch, for, and let's say if. Let us also talk about return. So these 4 are again some other keywords. So first let's talk about if, because that is the most used keyword that we use. So if is used in a programming language, as the name suggests, if you need to write in a condition. So for example, if you write something like if x is equal to 2, then print these specific words. So that is how we can use if to write a condition. Now let us assume that we wrote something like this: if x is equal to 2, print this specific function until something else happens, until the user says something, or until something happens in the code. In that case we can use the for keyword. So we can write for x is equals to 7 or something like that. So we can write something like if x is equals to 2, print the numbers from 1 to 10 for x is equal to 7. So it will print till 7 and it will end that place. So you can use for, if, switch and return in conditions, write loops, etc. You can write switch when you want to switch the function. Function again is also a keyword which we have talked in our previous episodes. But for example, imagine that you're writing a code where you have many functions and it's such a complicated functional programming code. And imagine when after running a few functions, it needs to switch to another function. So for example, let us assume we need to write something like if a person enters this value, then the code needs to switch from one function to another function. In that case, you can use the switch. And return is used in a programming code when imagine writing a really long piece of code, like really long, and you need to return the value, or you need to bring the value to the bottom piece of the code. So instead of just writing let x equals to 2, again you can just write return x and write the code from there on. And you can also use it in conditions and loops, which we'll talk about in the practical programming languages in the future. So that is how keywords work. There's still some more. So you have like try, which is used in exception handling, which we'll again talk in the future. But let us assume that you're writing some code and you get an error, or you know that there is a chance for an error to occur. Well, it's more of an exception, but let us assume that a problem might occur in the code. In that case, what you can do is you can use the try keyword to make sure that the code doesn't just fail or doesn't just crash. So you can write something like, if this specific error or exception occurs, then try doing some other function that might help solve the error. So we use try in exception handling. So this is basically about keywords. Now let's talk about something else. So now let's talk about identifiers. So what are identifiers? Well, identifiers are the unique names which are used to identify JavaScript variables. So we use identifiers, so something like x, y, z, anything like x is equal to 2, y is equal to 3, something like that. So these are what we call as identifiers. So now identifiers are pretty simple, but they have some simple rules. The first one is, for writing an identifier, you can use names, numbers, characters and dollar symbols. Now another important point about identifiers is that dollar symbols are not really used much. So there are really rare instances where you use dollar symbols, but they can be used. But most people just stick with numbers and letters. And the third one, and really important one, is identifiers are case sensitive. Not only identifiers, but a lot of things in JavaScript are case sensitive. And I have mentioned this in the previous episodes as well, this point. But if you write some code, which is something approximately about like x is equal to 2, and write capital X is equal to 2 or capital X is equal to 3, these are two different pieces of code because JavaScript is case sensitive. So small x is equal to 2 and capital X is equal to 3 still works. So now let's talk about something really complicated that a lot of people will find confusing. Sorry. Now let's talk about the assignment operator. Now this is a really hard to understand concept, but I'll try to make it as simple as possible. Because for the people who rely on maths, this is like just utterly confusing. So assignment operators I usually use so that, well, how should I put it? Alright, let us take an example. So in mathematical terms, if I write this, you will assume that x is equals to 2. But in JavaScript code, this symbol, the equal symbol that we use, is not used for defining that a specific identifier is a variable. It instead is used to just assign the value that x is equal to 2, because there is a difference between assigning and equaling a value. So if I write something like x is equal to x plus 4, in mathematical terms this makes no sense, but in JavaScript terms it makes sense because you are not saying that x plus 4 is equal to x, you are just storing the value of x plus 4 in x. So when you ask the value of x, it will just basically print out the value of x plus 4. So you can write x is equal to 2, x is equal to x plus 4, so x will be equal to 6. So that is how assignment operators work, where the equal to symbol is not saying that this one is equal to x, but instead it's just saying that it is storing the value of x plus 4. It is a little confusing, but as long as you're writing code, you'll get used to it. And one small gimmick you can say is that instead of writing let x is equal to 2, let y is equal to 3, let z is equal to 4, you could just write let x is equal to 2, comma, y is equal to 3, comma, z is equal to 4 in one single line, so that you don't have to use the keyword let again and again. So yeah, that is basically about JavaScript and about identifiers and keywords. So hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification button so you don't miss out any new videos, and that's all folks, and see you in the next one. Bye bye.